Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome back to part two. If you're here on Patreon, we are also here back to back with you recording. If you're not on Patreon, you're getting this a week later, but we're still back to back here in this live recording space. So
we're just getting ourselves ahead so that we're not recording an episode like on Christmas.
Exactly. I don't know if we've talked about it on the pod because I know we like to do our planning sessions at the beginning. But we figured out that our 200th episode will be the first episode of 2024. So we typically take the week of Christmas off and don't release an episode. But when we realized that the first week of January would be number 200, we're like, that's just such a lovely little like symmetry. So now we got to just finish out the rest of the month. But we are going to take January 9th off. So, just FYI, I know it's like a month away at this point. But yeah, so now we're trying to make sure that we are ahead so we can enjoy the holiday season and not be trying to record at like midnight on Christmas Eve while Santa's trying to build all the things in my house.
Yeah. Or even like research too, kind of give us like a little gap from, or at least just like leeway for that we're not having to, because I know I will be out of town.
Yeah.
So I will not be getting a lot done that week. I'll try to leading up to it, but that week won't be very useful. But yeah.
Exactly. Also, I just have to add.
Oh, go ahead.
Courtney's like, we don't have anything to say. And I'm like, I always got shit to say. Hold on.
I was just going to be like, we don't have any updates because we just recorded.
Yeah, no updates that really matter in the grand scheme of things, but I just had to share. So I talked about last week's episode 5 minutes ago, how we put up all of our Christmas decorations this week. So, I had to take a lot of stuff like down to put a lot of Christmas stuff up. So I have this like fake plant that's usually in my living room that's now on the desk behind me. And I really like it here. It just like, it's like a pop of color behind Courtney's head. It like makes the space a little more homey. Anyway, I just had to share that.
Especially because your guest room, just that color. I mean, it's a fine color, but you just don't have anything like on the walls. Like you don't have anything like
not a single thing
filling it up. And so, I could see needing just a little something to make it pop a little bit.
Exactly. Like this is a storage room / podcast recording room. So the only time I'm ever in this room is throwing shit in here that needs to be organized later or recording the podcast. So yeah, the walls are, I think it's technically a gray. Yeah, it's like a very, very light gray. And like Courtney said,
like a gray beige almost.
Yeah, like, and not a single thing on the wall. But now I have this lovely green. So I'm like, maybe I need to get a fake plant in here just to look at while we're recording.
Yeah. Perfect.
Anyway, yep. So that's the only update I had that clearly was just riveting. I know you guys were very excited to hear about that.
I meant like true crime updates, just since, we gave them all to you last episode.
Yeah.
So, again, we either have none or 4.
That's how it goes. But if you guys have not listened to part 1, please do so, because the rest of this will not make any sense if you haven't heard part 1.
You'll be very confused.
Yes. We did list the sources in that episode, so I'm not going to relist them.
So just a little short recap from last episode. We were kind of talking about a few of the Osage tribe who were being murdered, some suspected poisonings. And we kind of left off that W.W. Vaughn had went to visit George Bigheart when he was at the hospital after being poisoned. And he was going to give him all this information that he had towards the Osage murders. And W.W. Vaughn was murdered or suspected thrown out of the train on his way back, and all that information was gone. So they brought in the Bureau of Investigations, which is now the FBI. It's kind of where we left off. These Osage murders are continuing, and any step towards figuring out who did it is going nowhere. It's 1 step forward, 7 steps back at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about like the very widespread corruption and just everything that's happening with this case. So all of this corruption, but now the Bureau of Investigations, which, they have their own set of corruptions that we're not going to get into on this episode. But so they have arrived in town. So, in the summer of 1925, Tom White was the special agent in charge of the Bureau of Investigations in Houston. So, he received a call from J. Edgar Hoover himself in Washington, D.C., who wanted to speak to him in person. Which, also, did you realize that J. Edgar Hoover was 28 years old when he took over the FBI?
No, I didn't know he was that young.
28. Like,
He's
I'm
younger than
sorry,
me.
right?
No wonder he was so corrupt. All that power is so young. Of course he was fucking
I'm just
corrupt.
like, what and how? Yeah, anyway, I learned
Nobody
that.
else wanted that job.
They're like,
That's how
no.
everyone else is like, ooh, I'm
Yeah,
good.
blew my mind. Anyway, so J. Edgar Hoover wanted to speak to this Tom White in person. So at this time, the Bureau of Investigation had jurisdiction over a few obscure crimes, including those committed on Native American reservations. So, like, there were very specific things that they had jurisdiction over, but like not a whole lot of things.
Because this was
And
kind of the issue when we talked about like Bonnie and Clyde and stuff, right? Where it was like the
yes,
FBI like couldn't really intervene except in like
yeah,
these really specific crime things.
exactly, yep. And officers of the Bureau weren't allowed to carry guns or arrest anyone, which I didn't realize. So, like, at this time, like, they can't make any arrest, like, as what will become the FBI. They also had no formal training as law enforcement officers. So,
Oh, okay.
So Hoover told White that he wanted to discuss the Osage murders, and this would be like one of their first major homicide investigations because it was happening on Native American land. So the previous director of the Bureau of Investigations, Director Burns, had dispatched an agent from the Bureau to investigate, but he spent a few weeks there and just decided that continuing the investigation was useless. Okay.
He's like, well, anyone I interview dies.
Yeah,
So
pretty much. He's like, this isn't going to go anywhere. Yeah.
Don't know what to do.
So because of this, the Osage were forced to finance part of the federal investigation themselves. So they contributed about $20,000, which would be $300,000 today, for the Bureau of Investigations to investigate.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Isn't that wild?
That's wild.
So Hoover told White he wanted him to direct the investigation, and he sent him to Oklahoma City to take over the field office. So he knew, like Courtney said, that several people who had already investigated these murders had been killed. So he's like, just letting you know what you're getting into, you know. And White took over the field office in July of 1925 and had agents infiltrate the area, pretending to like be citizens moving there. So some were like insurance salesmen, cattlemen, just any other common occupation. So they just kind of all weaseled their way into the town undercover. And White found out that the records from the coroner's inquest for Anna Brown, along with the testimony, had been stolen. So, big surprise.
Yeah.
But the Undertaker had secretly kept her skull.
Why does this happen so often? Why do people keep body parts like this?
I don't know. And I don't know. There wasn't a whole lot about that. So I don't know if it was like supposed to be like good intentions of, oh, things are corrupt, so I want to try to hold on to some evidence, or if it was a creepy thing. I really don't know. It didn't go into that a whole lot. But so we talked a little bit in part 1 about William Hale. So he had told Molly that he would avenge her family. So he's like, I'm going to also be a part of this investigation. Like, I'm going to help you find out what happened. I want to get justice for you and your family. So when he heard that outlaws were going to rob a local store owner who had diamonds, he warned the shopkeeper ahead of time. So the shopkeeper actually shot and killed one of the robbers, a man named Asa Kirby. And Kirby was an associate of Henry Grammer's, who we talked about a little bit in part 1. Bill Smith had visited him to drink the night before his house was bombed. And Hale's own pastures were also set on fire one day. So there's just a lot of things happening in this area.
A lot.
And in late 1925, Molly sent a message to a local priest saying that she felt her life was in danger. So Molly had had diabetes for a while and had been like pretty sick at different points in her life. So a lot of people were like, is she dying like from diabetes complications? Like, is that what's going on? But an agent of the Indian Affairs Office heard that Molly was being slowly poisoned, which again, there were many suspected poisonings of the Osage happening at this time. And now Molly is all of a sudden getting sick. So they're wondering if that's what's happening here as well. And in July of 1925, White started investigating Brian Burkhart. Remember, he is the one who took Anna home after the luncheon at Molly's house. So he thought his alibi seemed airtight. He had been seen in town that night soon after Anna had last been seen at Molly's house. And his uncle, William Hale, again was known as the king of the Osage Hills. So his word meant a lot when he confirmed that he had seen Brian in town shortly after he had taken Anna home. In August, a few undercover agents went to Ralston to investigate, and there they learned that a group of white men reported seeing Anna in Ralston the night she was murdered. So one of those witnesses had vanished, and another had evidence that they said had since disappeared. The men who were willing to talk said they had seen Anna in a car with Brian and that they went to a nearby speakeasy until 10 p.m. So William Hale, who provided part of Brian's alibi, was also seen at the speakeasy that night. And there were accounts of the three of them drinking there until 1 a.m. Some say they then went to another speakeasy, and other accounts say that there was a third man that was not Hale who was also with them. And one witness reported seeing Anna and Brian around 3 a.m. and said Brian was yelling at Anna to stop her nonsense and get in the car. So White's investigation then turns to Pike, who was the private detective. So he hadn't been cooperating, and they actually had to initiate a manhunt for him. And so White now believes that Pike had actually been paid to interfere in the original investigation. And when they finally found him, Pike told the Bureau of Investigations that he had never been hired to solve the murder of Anna Brown. He had been hired to provide an alibi for Brian Burkhart. So he said that William Hale contacted him and asked for his assistance, and he told him that Brian wasn't involved, but he wanted to make sure that he had an alibi.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And Pike said that Ernest Burkhart, which is Molly's husband, had also been present sometimes at these meetings as well.
Which is so crazy, like how intertwined this all is. It's like Molly's husband and Ernest is Molly's husband, and Brian is her brother-in-law, who now is accused of killing her sister, but her uncle-in-law is the alibi, but they're all in meeting. It's a lot.
Yep. It's going to get a lot more. So in September, White started wondering if Bill Smith had information on William Hale and Ernest Burkhart. So Bill was actually the one who first thought Lizzie had been poisoned when her cause of death was a mystery. So he was the one that was kind of raising that idea of, okay, we don't know why she suddenly died months after her daughter. I think she was poisoned. He was the first one to kind of put that out there. And White thought that Bill had been killed because of something he knew. And supposedly on his deathbed, Bill also said that he only had two enemies in this world, William Hale and Ernest Burkhart. Pretty specific there. So White and his team started looking into oil money and head rights, as well as the white men who were guardians overseeing Osage money. And they found that these men would use Osage money to purchase items for the Osage from their own stores. So this white man owns the store. He's allowed to be the guardian of the Osage money. So he's buying the items that they need from his own store. So he's getting the profit.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
The money. Yeah. And he was also selling to them at much higher prices than he would white customers. So he's like, okay, I'm going to sell you this item I have for much more than it's worth.
Yeah. You need a can of beans. It's 50 cents in the store. But you need a can of beans, and it's actually $2. So, sorry, inflation.
Exactly. Yep. And they would also claim to be buying lands on behalf of their Osage wards, but they were actually using Osage money to buy land for themselves. And at other times, they were just outright stealing, literally just taking the money, not even these grand
Not even trying to hide it. They just, you get bolder and bolder. At first, you're just jacking up the price of beans, and then you're lying, and then you're like, you know what? No one's looking, no one's asking, no one's keeping a record. I'm just gonna take it.
Exactly. The authorities are in on it, so who's gonna come for you?
The law was built for us to do this.
Yep.
Basically.
Yeah, 100%. So by 1925, white guardians had stolen about $8 million from members of the Osage tribe.
Ooh, and that's $8 million in 1925
money. 1925. Yep.
Ooh.
So in 1924, the Indian Rights Association had conducted an investigation into this exploitation and had documented that rich Native Americans were being robbed by their guardians. And a corrupt judge also told the Osage that if they voted for him, he would make sure they got a good guardian. So I'm like, you're literally just admitting that the system is flawed.
Yeah. Ugh.
And the evidence of fraud was brought before county judges, but was ignored. One documented story was of a woman whose sick baby died because she wasn't able to get access to her own money from her guardian to get her baby medical treatment. Her own money that she couldn't use because the white man who oversaw her money told her no, and her baby died because of it.
A woman who is old enough to have a child and raise a child is unable to have control of her own money.
Just so disgusting. So around the time that White started wondering what Bill Smith knew, he also sent an undercover officer who was posing as an insurance salesman to speak to a woman at a gas station and pretend to be looking to buy a house. So he's kind of just like, hey, I'm coming into town. Like, I want to buy a house. Like, where would I go? Who would I talk to? You know, you work at the gas station, you know everybody in town. And the woman told him William Hale was the guy to contact. And she also told the undercover officer that she knew Hale's own workers had once set his land on fire for the insurance money. And remember, he's supposed to be an insurance salesman. And she's like sharing this tidbit of information with him. And White and his team started investigating how Hale was able to get Henry Roan's life insurance policy by claiming Roan was in debt to him when records showed that Roan clearly had plenty of his own money to pay off the debt. So he's like, okay, so you're saying that you're able to get added to his life insurance policy because he owes you so much money, but he has all of that money. It's just being kept by his guardian. But like, you as another white man should easily be able to say, hey, I'm trying to get a debt owed to me, and he would give it right to you.
Exactly.
So the insurance salesman admitted that he knew there was no debt, but he wanted the commission for the sale. So he's like, yeah, I gave him the policy anyway because I got commission for the sale, but I knew he didn't really owe him a debt. And one insurance company had rejected Roan's first insurance policy application because he was an alcoholic, but Hale was then able to find a doctor who would sign off that Roan was in good health. Just layers of corruption on corruption.
We just need to retitle both these episodes just as corruption.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just corruption.
That's all you do.
I mean, obviously the murders as well, but like, hooey.
Yeah. So the local law enforcement had tried to build a case against the man who had been caught having an affair with Roan's wife shortly before his death. And Hale actually approached that man after Roan's murder and told him that he should get out of town. Hale also left some whiskey for Roan's widow, but she was worried that it was poisoned and refused to drink it. He also visited her several times and tried to get her to sign papers related to the insurance policy, and he had attempted to purchase Roan's head rights prior to helping him purchase the insurance policy. So the current law prevented the selling of head rights, but Hale thought that Congress would change that law soon, so he's like, okay, I want to be prepared. Like, I'll go ahead and have like all of the paperwork ready, so when Congress changes this, I can buy this head right.
Yeah.
So this next part just like completely shocked me. So if Bill and Rita Smith died at the same time, Molly would have inherited Rita's money. But because Bill outlived Rita by a few hours, he inherited her money. So when he died, his next of kin inherited the fortune.
What?
Yeah, because I mean, she left all of her money to him. That was her husband.
Yeah.
So he had it for a few hours, but then he died. So then it went to his next of kin instead of her next of kin.
That is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whew. So White decided he'd have more luck speaking to criminals because he wasn't trusted by local citizens, both white and Native American. So one criminal he spoke to was 23-year-old Dick Gregg, who was in prison for robbery. He was reluctant to get on Hale's bad side, but eventually agreed to talk to White in exchange for time off his sentence. So Gregg told White that in the summer of 1922, Hale approached a man named Al Spencer and said he wanted to speak with him and his gang. So Gregg was a part of that gang. And when they met at one of his pastures, Hale told him he would pay him $2,000 to kill an old man and his Native American wife, Bill and Rita Smith. Spencer said he wouldn't kill a woman for money, and Gregg agreed. And at the time Gregg told the story to White, Spencer was already dead, and Gregg's word didn't really mean much because he was a criminal. So another criminal told White that Asa Kirby was an associate of Henry Grammer, who designed the bomb that killed Bill and Rita Smith and Nettie Brookshire. So if you remember, Asa Kirby was shot and killed by a shopkeeper when he broke into his store to steal his diamonds. And the shopkeeper had been warned ahead of time about this robbery by William Hale. So it's coming back around.
Yup.
Another criminal told White that Hale had set up the robbery and was the one who told Kirby about the diamonds and what time he should break in, knowing that he also had given the information to the shop owner who would kill him. So kind of working both sides.
He literally set this whole thing up. Like,
he's just he's trying to play with puppets here. He's like a little puppet master here.
Which, like, what an elaborate way to kill someone. Like, because, like, you want this man dead.
In this time of corruption, and like maybe it'd be different if it's a white man versus a Native American, but still, it's like they're not solving this shit.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yet.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. And on June 14th, 1923, Henry Grammer was killed when his Cadillac flipped over. Some said his brakes and steering wheel had been tampered with. So in October of 1925, White held a meeting with the governor of Oklahoma about the Osage murders. An aide told White that they had been receiving information from a prisoner at the state penitentiary named Bert Lawson. So Lawson was from Osage County and had been charged with murdering a fisherman in 1922, but was acquitted on self-defense. 3 years later, he was charged with second-degree burglary and sentenced to 7 years in prison. So Lawson wanted to meet directly with White, so White went to go interview him. Lawson told White that in 1918 he started working as a ranch hand for Bill Smith, and he got to know William Hale and his nephews Ernest and Brian Burkhart. And in early 1921, he discovered his wife had been having an affair with Bill, so he left his employment. Ernest then told Lawson he should blow up Bill and his wife, but he wouldn't agree to it. So then Hale came to him and promised him $5,000 in cash and showed him a white fuse and how he could use it. He still refused. After Lawson was arrested on burglary charges, Hale offered to get him an attorney if he would kill Bill and Rita Smith. So Lawson said Hale took him to Ernest, who showed him a box of nitroglycerin and how to use the fuse. He said the three of them then went to Smith's house and Ernest and Hale left. Lawson admitted to setting up the bomb and said Ernest and Hale picked him up nearby afterwards and snuck him back into his jail cell with the help of the sheriff. The sheriff's in on it too. Everybody's in on it. So on October 24th, 1925, White sent Hoover a telegram saying Lawson confessed to the Smiths explosion at the instruction of William Hale and Ernest Burkhart, and they also knew they needed to get Molly away from her husband Ernest because they now believed he was responsible for poisoning her. So again, like she was not feeling well. She was thinking she was being poisoned or something happening. And now they're like, Ernest is becoming our number one suspect in this line of murders against her family and the rest of the Osage community. We need to get her safe.
So that's the thing, like her entire family. And then again, the fact that Bill and Rita Smith were planned to be killed at the same time to ensure that Rita's money wouldn't go to Bill first. You know, like if all of this was a plan by the Burkharts to get all of the money to Molly, so then they could kill Molly and Ernest would inherit all of Molly's money as her husband. They had to kill Bill and Rita at the same time to ensure the money stayed with Rita and then went to Molly. But because he lived a little bit longer, it went to him instead. Just the amount of like manipulation that went into everything they did to make sure that all the pieces fell the way they did is insane.
Yeah. Warrants were issued on January 4th, 1926 for William Hale and Ernest Burkhart for the murders of Bill and Rita Smith and Nettie Brookshire. And since the Bureau of Investigation agents couldn't make arrest, Sheriff Frias was called in to make the arrest. And I know you're like, wait a minute. He was in trouble. He wasn't the sheriff. Well, he'd been reelected.
Yep, he was back.
His criminal charges did not matter.
Nope. Oh, you were, charged with failure to uphold the law. That's okay. We'll elect you back to uphold the law again.
He was like, I'm sorry. And they were like, we forgive you.
Sounds very similar to a certain presidential election coming up.
True. So, U.S. Marshals also joined him to locate and arrest Hale and Ernest. So Ernest was located at a pool hall in Fairfax and taken to a jail in Guthrie, and Hale couldn't be found. So they heard rumors that he'd ordered a new suit of clothes and said he planned on leaving town soon. So they thought he was gone for good. They're like, he got word of it, he ran. But then he walked into the sheriff's office in a perfectly pressed suit and shined shoes and said he was turning himself in. So he just wanted to do it like a gentleman.
Yeah. No, I just want to look presentable when I come in.
Mm-hmm. You're not going to catch me at a pool hall in Fairfax. I'm going to walk in here in a pressed suit.
Exactly.
So the sheriff's office told Hale it was Ernest and Lawson who turned him in, and Hale denied having anything to do with it. He said Lawson was lying and he wouldn't confess to anything. He also said he'd been in Texas at the time of the explosion, and he had proof because he had received a telegram while there and signed for it. So Blackie Thompson was a bank robber that the Bureau released from prison and recruited to be an informant prior to White taking over the field office. However, after his release, Blackie went on a crime spree and robbed a bank and killed a police officer. He was promptly arrested and sent back to prison, but this did make the Bureau look bad. They're like, our informant just robbed a bank and killed a police officer, not looking good.
Yeah, like the informant that we got out of prison to work for us, and then he went on to do these things.
Yeah. So after White took over, he had Blackie transferred to a federal prison in Guthrie so he could interview him. And he told Blackie he would not receive any time off his current sentence because they wanted to eliminate the possibility that he'd lie to get a reduced sentence. Because that's kind of the problem with like jailhouse informants. They get a reduced sentence, and so they'll just make up anything that you want them to hear so they can do it.
Yeah.
So Blackie said Hale and Ernest approached him and another man named Curly Johnson and asked them to kill Bill and Rita. They told him he should steal Ernest's car while he was home with Molly and use it to commit the murders. So Blackie stole the car but was later arrested for car theft, so he never committed the murders. So agents brought Ernest and Blackie in a room together, and Blackie told Ernest that he had shared everything he knew. And this prompted Ernest to confess. So Ernest was like, okay, well, I guess if you know everything, I'll admit it too.
I'll tell you the rest. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll fill in the blanks. And he did sign a document saying he was making this statement of his own free will and with no exemption from prosecution. So Ernest told White that he always looked up to his Uncle William and did what he asked him to do. Ernest said Hale first approached Blackie and Curly Thompson, then Al Spencer, and then finally Henry Grammer, who said Asa Kirby would plant the bomb. So he basically asked everybody in town to do it. So I don't know how it took so long.
Exactly. He's trying to get this whole damn town to do his dirty work for him.
Like, guy, at this point, just do it. But, I mean, it's all going to lead back to you at some point.
Yeah.
So Ernest said Lawson had nothing to do with it, and he did later admit to lying. Hale then went to Fort Worth with Henry Grammer at the time Kirby was setting up the bomb, so they'd have an alibi. That's kind of how the telegram happened. It was all set up.
Yep.
So Ernest told White that a man named John Ramsey had killed Henry Roan, and Grammer approached him in early 1923 and said Hale had a job for him. He needed, quote, an Indian knocked off, unquote. And Ramsey agreed to lure Roan down into a canyon by offering him whiskey. So they drank together, and then Ramsey shot Roan in the back of his head when he was getting in his car to leave.
So Curly Johnson was now dead at this point, and his widow thought he had been poisoned by Hale. And another possible witness to Henry Roan's murder had been bludgeoned to death. So again, it just seems that anyone who is getting close to this murder investigation is ending up dead. So the Bureau discovered that the third man seen with Anna and Brian was actually Kelsey Morrison, a man who had been recruited by the Bureau as an undercover informant and was helping them identify who this mystery man was, knowing that it was himself. The Bureau is great at these undercover informants.
Yeah, I'll help you find him. Yep. I don't know where he is. Don't look in a mirror.
Will. Don't know who that guy looks like. Never seen him before. But Ernest said Morrison was the one who actually shot Anna Brown. So Molly immediately got better when she was removed from her husband and Hale and checked into a hospital. White wasn't able to prove who was actually responsible for poisoning Molly, but it was clear one of them had been. And White was the one to inform Molly that her husband and William Hale had been responsible for the murders of her family members. She didn't know anything about this, and she couldn't believe that her husband had been responsible, but she did tell White that she wanted whoever was responsible for this to be held accountable, even if it was her own family. But she did also say that Ernest was home the night of the explosion, and no one came to her house, so she knew that, like, he couldn't have had anything to do with it. Because she's like, no, like, he was home, like, no one came here, nothing weird happened, like, I know he didn't have anything to do with this. There was also a rumor that Hale had an affair with Anna and was the one who fathered her unborn baby. So Hale had been seen with George Bigheart just before he went to the hospital, and after his death, Hale made a claim for $6,000 upon his estate using a forged creditor's note and claiming Bigheart owed him money.
How much money do you need? How greedy fucking are you? Like $6,000? I mean, we already determined that's like a lot of money in this day. Like, how greedy are you?
Like, and it's just over and over and over and
over and over again. Yeah.
So I can't remember if it was last week's episode or this week's episode, but we mentioned Joe Bates, who died of a suspected poisoning in 1921. He left behind a wife and 6 children, and Hale had produced the deed to his land after his death. So he had been drinking with Bates for the past year and trying to get him to sell him his land, but he always refused. And despite Hale having this apparent deed to his land, his wife said that he never would have sold him his land. So he'd been coming around for the past year, trying to get him to sell it. He kept saying no. And then suddenly, after he dies, very suspiciously, Hale has the deed to his land. And his wife's like, no, he never would have done that.
Yeah.
So the federal prosecutor thought it was too dangerous to try Hale in the state legal system because of his many connections, but the jurisdiction was murky. So Native American territory was federal, but a lot of Osage territory had been allotted by the time of the murders, so that land was now privately owned and therefore under state jurisdiction. So the property where Anna was found was privately owned and therefore could only be tried by the state legal system. However, Henry Roan was killed on an Osage allotment that hadn't yet been sold to whites. So that Osage property owner was under guardianship and was therefore considered a ward of the federal government. So William Hale and John Ramsey were charged in federal court and faced the death penalty. And in early January, one of Hale's associates was charged with perjury and another was arrested for trying to intoxicate witnesses. And on January 20th, Ernest told White that he thought he was going to be killed. So Ernest hadn't yet been charged, so White put an agent in charge of guarding him in a secret hotel to protect him. On March 1st, the judge ruled that Roan's murder was not the equivalent of tribal land, so his murder had to be tried in state court. So they appealed to the Supreme Court, but it would take months for another ruling, so Hale and Ramsey had to be released. The state immediately filed charges. They didn't think they would be able to find an impartial jury, but they wanted to keep the 2 men behind bars. So they're like, this isn't a great plan, but we also don't want them just out on the street, so this is what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So at their trial, Ernest Burkhart took the stand, and Hale's lawyers asked to speak to him privately. So they asked to wait until the next day for Burkhart's testimony. So the next day, White announced that Burkhart was now refusing to testify for the state and would be taking the stand as a defense witness. My guy.
Okay. Ernie, you were there.
So on the stand, he said that he'd never spoken to Hale about anything and that his confession had been coerced. And Burkhart, Hale, and Ramsey all said they had been hooked up to electricity and had guns held to their heads by federal investigators in order to confess. And obviously, the Bureau refuted this.
Hooked up to electricity?
Yeah.
Just like we put them in the electric chair, we just didn't turn it on.
Yeah.
But just the threat of it to get them to confess.
Basically, is what they're saying. Like, oh, if you don't confess, like, we're just going to fry you right here.
Yeah.
Okay. So Kelsey Morrison testified that Hale told him he had a plan to get rid of Molly's whole family so that Ernest could inherit their money. On the day of Anna's murder, Morrison's wife, Catherine Cole, was with him, and he told her to stay in the car. Anna was too drunk to walk, so Morrison and Brian grabbed her and carried her into the ravine. They helped her sit on a rock by the creek. So Brian had to hold Anna upright, and then Morrison shot her in the head. Catherine testified that she was in the car for about 25 or 30 minutes, and that when Brian and Morrison returned, Anna was not with them. Molly and Ernest's 4-year-old daughter, Anna, died from illness on June 3rd. It did appear to be unrelated to these poisonings and anything else. It appeared to truly just be an illness. She wasn't even under Molly's care at that time. She was living with relatives to like keep her safe. But her death really shook Ernest. And on June 7th, when he was being escorted back to the county jail, he snuck a note to the prosecutor and asked him to visit him in his jail cell that night. He told the prosecutors that he was tired of lying and he didn't want to go on with the trial, but he said that he was afraid to tell this to his own attorneys. And on June 9th, Ernest Burkhart changed his plea to guilty. He read a statement admitting he delivered a message from Hale to Ramsey saying it was time to blow up the Smith house. A judge finally ruled that Henry Roan's death was on federal land. And on June 21st, Ernest Burkhart was sentenced to life in prison with hard labor, and he appeared to just be relieved at that sentence. Like, it was just like, okay, like, it's finally over. Like, I'm okay with this.
Yeah, and I do believe Ernest is also a terrible person.
Yeah.
But it does seem like his uncle really orchestrated all of this and like forced all of them to go along with it. Like, obviously he should have stood up to him, everything, but he wasn't like the mastermind in this. So I think probably for sure after all of this, he's like, okay, you're right, I'm done.
Like, he felt guilty for sure and was like, okay,
yeah,
I will accept my sentence. But before Ernest pleaded guilty, jurors were dismissed from his trial because Hale had tried to bribe them. So again, just orchestrating everything. Hale and Ramsey went to trial for the death of Henry Roan during the last week of July in 1926. Ernest was called to testify, and he said Hale and Grammer had discussed how to kill Roan and that the original plan was to kill him with a batch of poisoned moonshine. He confirmed that many Osage had been killed this way, as they had suspected all along. Hale was angry that Ramsey had not shot Roan in the front of the head and left the gun to make it look like a suicide. And Hale just continued to deny any involvement in these murders. So the jury started deliberating on August 20th, and after 5 days, the judge asked if there was any possibility of an agreement, but the foreman said no. The prosecutor knew some jurors had been bribed, and Brian Burkhart was also tried for the murder of Anna Brown, but there was a hung jury. So again, they just can't get an impartial jury because Hale is the king of the Osage Hills and is bribing everyone and is threatening everyone. And
yeah.
So White's men were instructed to safeguard the jury for Hale and Ramsey's retrial to ensure no one was able to be bribed. And at the retrial, Molly was forced to testify and admit that she had once been married to Henry Roan. The judge said there was like no reason for this testimony, that it wasn't relevant, but at this point, like, that information was out there. And after 8 days of testimony, the jury started deliberating on October 28th. And the next morning, they reached a decision and found both William Hale and John Ramsey guilty of first-degree murder. The jury wouldn't vote on the death penalty, so they were both sentenced to natural life in prison.
The next year, Kelsey Morrison went on trial again for the murder of Anna Brown. So now he recanted his confession, and Brian Burkhart was given immunity. So Molly had to listen to how Brian had gotten Anna drunk and then held her up while Morrison shot her. Brian then returned to the scene of the crime with Molly and her family to identify Anna's body. Kelsey Morrison was convicted for Anna's murder. So no one was ever charged with Charles Whitehorn's murder. If you remember, we talked about that a long time ago, part 1, very beginning. But his family did suspect his widow, Hattie, was involved. Shortly after Charles' death, she married a disreputable man, and they think they were in on it together. And Hattie even once told investigators, if I tell you what happened, you'll send me to the electric chair. Which I'm like, why do people make comments like this?
Right? Like, just say what happened or don't.
like, yeah, don't tease. Like, just say it.
Yeah, like, you pretty much admitted to it, but I guess in some part of their brain, they're like, oh, I can't actually admit to it.
Yeah. So Molly divorced Ernest Burkhart and later fell in love with and married a man named John Cobb in 1928. She fought to end the corrupt system of guardianship over Osage money, and on April 21st, 1931, a court ruled that Molly was no longer a ward of the state, and at 44 years old, she could finally spend her own money however she wanted. 44 years old.
Yep.
And then overall guardianship over Osage money for everyone did end in 1934. So there were still 3 years. A lot of people did not have, like, could not spend their own money however they wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at that point, God knows how much money had been stolen from them.
Exactly. Like, how much money do you even have left at this point after these men have taken it from you for years and years?
Yeah. So the Osage murders demonstrated the need for a national, skilled, scientific force to investigate federal crimes. So the Bureau of Investigations officially became the FBI, or Federal Bureau of Investigations, in 1935. And Congress passed a series of New Deal reforms that gave the federal government their first set of criminal codes and allowed them to make arrests and carry firearms. So obviously, like, listening to the FBI here in its early stages versus now, you see how far they've come.
Yeah, very different.
So the Osage fought for Congress to pass a law that said someone had to be at least half Osage to inherit head rights, which would have prevented many white people having their Osage spouses murdered in order to inherit their head right. Tom White was promoted to warden of a federal prison where Hale and Ramsey would later be transferred to, and Hale still never admitted to his role in the murders. So he never, ever admitted. He was probably way too much of a narcissist to do that.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Molly died in 1937 at 50 years old. Ernest Burkhart was released from prison later that year. He soon robbed an Osage house and went back to prison until 1959.
Still learning nothing, apparently.
Nope, nothing. John Ramsey was released in 1947. William Hale was also released in 1947 at the age of 72. And Burkhart and Hale were both barred from returning to Oklahoma after their releases. And Burkhart appealed this after his second prison release from prison. And he was allowed to return to Osage County in the 1960s, where he lived in a trailer with his brother, Brian. And Ernest Burkhart died in 1986, and William Hale died in a nursing home in Arizona in 1962. The Osage were hit really hard during the Great Depression. Many lost their fortunes and mansions in the 1930s. Members of the Osage tribe still receive oil royalty checks once a quarter today, although they aren't really enough to live on anymore. They really aren't what they used to be. Osages from the districts of Gray Horse, Hominy, and Powhuska unite every June for the Elanchka dances. They take place over 3 weekends in June from Thursday to Sunday, and many Osage travel from all over the country to watch and participate in these ceremonial dances. However, the Osage Reign of Terror left its mark on the Osage people. Many consider the Reign of Terror as spanning from the spring of 1921 through January of 1926, when Hale was arrested. However, there are documented murders before and after those dates, and many feel slighted that Hale was blamed for all, and many murders were never investigated or prosecuted, despite it being impossible for Hale to have committed some of the murders. So they're like, they made William Hale the scapegoat because he was the mastermind in a lot of these, but also Hale couldn't have been responsible for Barney McBride's death all the way in DC. Yeah. So
it's clearly there were so many other people involved, and it appears that William Hale was the mastermind behind Molly's family, but again, there were so many other, this wasn't a unique situation to William Hale and the Burkharts. This was happening all over the Osage with white people who were trying to get their money. And like you said, he was just kind of the scapegoat of case closed. All right, we did it.
And how many white people probably tricked Osage people into marrying them? Just maybe love bombing and being I love you so much, and making them fall in love with them. And all they cared about was their money. Yeah. All they cared about was that. That's heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is why they got the law changed, that you had to be at least half Osage in order to inherit the head right. So to prevent that kind of thing from happening. But yeah, I'm sure that happened a ton. Even if you weren't going to go on to kill your spouse, you're well, they're going to die eventually and I'll get it.
Yeah.
God.
Or they're at least rich. So I don't have to work as hard because we can just live off their money.
Yeah.
So David Graun, who's the author of Killers of the Flower Moon, looked into a few of the other murders that occurred during this time. And W.W. Vaughn's family was forced to live in a storage unit after his death. Several Osage took them in and fed them. But if you remember, someone had stolen like all the money he'd left for his wife and his 10 children.
Yep.
They tried to look into Vaughn's death after Hale's conviction, but they received anonymous letters threatening them. And Grahn found that W.W. Vaughn's widow, Rosa Vaughn, had filed a lawsuit against H.G. Burt. So Burt was the president of a bank. He was friends with Vaughn and also his attorney. And Burt owed Vaughn $10,000. So Vaughn was George Bighart's attorney and had helped him get a certificate of competency so he wouldn't have to be required to have a guardian oversee his money. Bighart was going to pay Vaughn $10,000 for his legal services, but Burt stole the money. So both Bighart and Vaughn were killed just a few days later. The court ruled that Burt had to pay Rosa back $5,000 plus interest, and further research into Burt revealed that he ran a loan business that targeted the Osage. So records from a closed grand jury showed that Burt had recommended someone else to Hale to target for an insurance scheme. So he also appears to be in on this whole fuck-up business.
Yep.
He also inherited some of Bighart's money because he was Bighart's daughter's guardian. So he gained access to the fortune when Bighart died and his daughter inherited the money. So he's like, I get double the money now.
Mm-hmm. Now I can steal this money that I have the control over.
Yeah. And even worse, H.G. Burt was also the guardian for several other Osage who had died mysteriously. And if we also remember, many people were just stealing from the money even when they were alive. I'm sure H.G. Burt was a part of that.
Yep.
Another possible victim was Mary Lewis. So she was born in 1861. And by 1918, she'd been divorced twice and was raising a 10-year-old adopted daughter. She went to Liberty, Texas with 2 white companions, where they bought a houseboat and stayed on the river. And Mary vanished in August of 1918. Authorities didn't investigate, so her family hired a private detective, and her friend Middleton, who was one of her traveling companions, pretended to be her son to cash her checks after her disappearance. So again, fuck upness. And then Mary's body was found on January 18th, 1919. Her skull appeared to have been beaten by a heavy object, and the other white companion, who was Middleton's friend, confessed to a plot conceived by Middleton. Middleton wanted Mary dead in order to get her head right. He was convicted of murder and condemned to die, and his sentence was commuted to life in prison, and then he was pardoned by the governor of Texas after serving 6 years.
6 years.
All the way to the top. Governors of every state.
Yep.
Raymond Redcorn Sr. was married to his second wife when he died after a protracted illness in 1931. He had voiced concerns about being poisoned prior to his death, but no investigation was conducted after his death, and many of his family members were suspicious of his second wife, who inherited all of his money after his death. It's clear these murders weren't a single conspiracy by William Hale, but were a larger conspiracy by a number of white men to rob the Osage of the wealth they had gained. The FBI estimated there were 24 murders during the Osage Reign of Terror, but they closed the case after Hale's conviction and didn't continue to investigate any other murders. 605 members of the Osage tribe died between 1907 and 1923, and it's difficult to compare these death rates to the larger population at the time because death records were pretty incomplete, but it does seem the Osage were dying at higher rates than other populations in the area at this time. I mean, even in this county and general area are we seeing how many people were dying.
Exactly.
Over money. Money. And look, I get money does buy you happiness because it makes your life easier, but it's not worth killing people over and taking advantage of people over.
Exactly.
It kills me. So today, the Osage estimate that at least 100 of their own were murdered in the first few decades of the 20th century as a plot to steal money that they had gained through their oil head rights. Some of the murderers were prosecuted for their crimes, but many more likely got away with it, as we've talked about, even in this episode, 2 to 3 people who got away with it because they just convicted William Hale and all of his people he'd recruited to help him, and they were like,
Mhm.
we solved the issue, guys.
Yep.
We're good. And it's
They're
like,
like, that's it. The end. It's like, no,
he was
no.
just an example of the bigger picture of murder and death and corruption and
Just pure
all of
greed.
that.
Like all of this just
Mm-hmm.
boils down to pure greed. And like you said, like how do you take another life, multiple lives for money?
Mm-hmm.
For what? Like we're all gonna die at some point and you can't take it with you. Like what is so
Yeah.
important about it that you're willing to like kill
And
all of these people over it?
it goes back to racism too, because it's
Mm-hmm.
like, would they have done this if it was a group of other white men?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they would have had some schemes to try and do whatever, but would they have done this?
But see, that's the thing. There would not have been laws in place that allowed
Mm-hmm.
them to control the money if it was a group
Yeah,
of other white men. Like
that's true
that
too.
that is the racism right there, that these laws even existed because they're like, oh, whoa, Native Americans, like they're not competent to manage their own money. Like we have to step in and manage it for them. What? For what? Like what
Mm-hmm.
makes you think that? Like just
Yeah,
pure racism and just disgusting.
yeah. But if you end up watching Killers of the Flower Moon, I'm definitely going to whenever it
Yeah.
hits Apple TV and we can discuss it. You know, I've heard it's a really, really good film. I've heard it's
Mm-hmm.
really well done, but I've also heard that maybe it focuses a little bit too much on white people. And I've also kind of heard some pushback. I don't know for sure. This is again just what I'm seeing on Twitter of
Mm-hmm.
like, because it is a Martin Scorsese film, so it's like, why is a white man telling this story? And
Yeah.
I don't know what he did. Maybe he did have Native American consultants or the
Mm-hmm.
Osage tribe. I'm just seeing a few
Yeah.
tweets on Twitter of people saying it. I'm not hating on the movie. Like I said, I'm gonna watch it. It's Martin Scorsese. I'm sure it's really well done. I
Mm-hmm.
heard like the main actress is like captivating in the
Mm-hmm.
movie. Like she's wonderful. So don't take that as me being a hater. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, don't forget it can be open for discussion about things we can do better today and in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always room for those discussions. Like I don't think
Mm-hmm.
anyone is ever going to get it 100% right. And I don't think you're ever going to get it 100% right for 100% of the people involved. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there can be some people who are like, "Yeah, I appreciate the way this was done," but other people are like, "No, like this offended me. I didn't appreciate how this was done." Like there's always room to have those discussions and talk about ways to continue to improve on things like that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, I saw one tweet from a person, and there could be people from the Osage tribe who were like, this movie was done beautifully and told beautifully.
Mhm.
And why are you speaking for me? Or I feel like
Yeah,
there's a lot of circumstances like that too. Like,
exactly.
I can't speak too much on this, but I know like when the Washington football team to me changed their name, there were
Mhm.
some people being like, it is important, but we've got a lot of shit going on that's more important than the name. But then other people being like, the name's really important. So, like you said, there's going to be people on the same side who don't view things
Mhm.
as big, also. So,
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, and just also, I mean, the fact that this isn't, at least until this movie came out, this isn't a well-known story. You know what I mean? Like this isn't
mm-mm.
something, I mean, like I feel like
I'd
a lot of
never
people,
heard of this book until the movie. Like, I
yeah,
saw a trailer for the movie and I was like, that looks amazing. And then you were
yeah.
like, I got the book, and I was like, you knew about the
I'm telling you,
book?
I feel like some podcast probably mentioned it at some point. I don't remember
Mm-hmm.
how I like came upon it, um, but yeah, I mean, I didn't know the story at all until I started. Like, I didn't even know. I mean, I'm sure at some point I knew what it was about when I put it on my list of books I wanted to read, and then promptly forgot for 3 years, like I do.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like I didn't know what this was about. I feel like a lot of people know like the Trail of Tears and like that story, but I feel like this one
Mm-hmm.
isn't commonly discussed at all. And so
Just the
many other
continuation
tribes.
of it wasn't just the Trail of Tears and then being displaced. It was then they were being displaced and moved somewhere else. And then they had to move somewhere else again. Oh,
Exactly.
okay. We will pay you for the oil on your land. But also, by the way, you don't have direct access to that. Also, you have to have someone who tells you what to do with that money. And also,
Mhm.
now we have people who are going to kill you for that money, and we're not going to do anything to stop it. We're going to have laws that promote it, actually.
Yeah, we're going to be in on it and help keep them from getting prosecuted.
So
And also, we're
yeah.
going to send your children away to a white school that's going to completely strip away your cultural identity and your way of dress and your language and your all of your traditions. And
yeah, because I feel like that's the thing too. People are like, oh, the Trail of Tears, but they got their reservations, and it's like, but
no,
hold
yeah,
on, hold on.
exactly.
It's deeper. It's deeper than that.
Yeah. But I hope you guys learned something new. I feel like this was a really, really important story to tell. I'm glad we made it a two-parter so we could include as much information as possible because we never want to leave anything out. So hopefully you guys agree and thought it was worth it as well.
Yes.
That being said, Courtney, what is your perk of the week?
So as we said, we're recording these back to back. So perks of the week were a little hard to come by. But I have one. And that is today of this recording. It is still November. And I am 80% done with my Christmas shopping.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. So I went Black Friday shopping and I was like, I had my list. And then something over the weekend, like after Black Friday shopping, I went full sloth mode. I mean, I did a few things. Like I did a little podcast research and like whatever, but I did not leave my house or leave the couch basically. And I just sat there and I was like, I'm ready to be done with my Christmas shopping. I'm just ready to be done.
Just knock it out.
I was on gift talk. That's what I'm going to call it. I don't know if that's what other people call it. Like gift giving guides of like what like gifts for her, gifts for him, gifts for father-in-law, like giving me ideas of like what to get people. And then I just started ordering them and getting them out and getting them wrapped up. So I have a few little like straggler things I still need to get. But at this time, I am mostly done with my Christmas shopping. And since you guys are listening to this on, it'd be December 13th.
Yes.
12th.
Yes, 12th.
December 12th. Start your Christmas shopping if you've not.
I hope you guys have started. Finish your Christmas shopping.
Do not be like my husband and make us walk around the mall on December 23rd to just pick some bullshit out because you didn't think of it. But yeah, so I'm feeling very productive this year. Awesome. I feel very good about it. I feel like not that I'm not caring as much. Obviously, I'm caring about people's gifts, but some of them came easy to me. And I'm also like, I don't have to put myself through so much stress to get the perfect gift for everybody. Yeah. Like people would be grateful no matter what. Because sometimes I'm like, I feel like I have to make it like 10 out of 10 every.
But you do those. Not that you have to, but you end up doing so.
I still feel like most of my gifts are really good. I'll say that. I'm not going to say any of my
Courtney
gifts are bad.
Is a great gift giver.
I showed my sister this too. I have like note apps on my phone of like things people say. For all the kids in my life, I have their Amazon wish list. I have their sizes they're currently wearing. I have it all together, so I just know. But that's my perk of the week is I'm on it on Christmas shopping. Then I'm going to come back and you guys are going to be like, good job. And I'm going to be like, haven't done the 20% yet.
You're like, still waiting on that last little bit. I've probably only done about 25-30%, but I know most of what I'm planning to get. Like I have a list of like, okay, here's like all of my ideas and thoughts. I just haven't actually purchased them, ordered them. I also am running into the problem where we keep being like, okay, like we're not going to do like a huge Christmas for Millie. Like she has plenty of stuff. And then I see something and I'm like, oh, but she would really like that. I'm just going to get this one. And then it starts to get out of control. So I gotta rein that in. But I also have her Amazon wish list, and then I'm like to give other people ideas, and then I'm like, oh, but I want to get her this. Oh, but I want, and I'm like, stop shopping on the wish list, Jacqueline.
So that's my thing. If you do your Christmas shopping, guys, get it done. Don't stress yourselves out too long. And no matter what you get people, as long as you put some thought into it, they'll love it. And if they don't, you maybe don't need that person in your life.
Yeah, that's on them, not on you. Because a gift should be about giving and not about like, oh, it has to be the perfect thing. And like the person receiving it shouldn't be like, oh, well, they got me this instead of like, no, like be grateful for like anyone who thinks of you and takes the time to get you a present, no matter what it is, should be appreciated. Just bang.
Yeah. So I do the same thing where I make a list. And then this weekend I was like, I'm purchasing all of it. I'm just buying.
Yep.
Ship it to the house. So that's my perk of the week. Now that we've talked about Christmas in the last like 3 episodes, are you sick of it yet? Anyway, Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
It's still
is Christmas related.
Like you said, we are recording back to back.
We don't have much going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's Christmas. That's the only thing going on in my life right now. But no, so this weekend, the day after Thanksgiving, here in Knoxville, we have this thing called Fantasy of Trees, which I learned twice apparently this weekend that Courtney has never been.
Drunk Jacqueline and sober Jacqueline both learned it.
Yes, we were both surprised.
Same response by both of you.
We're consistent, girly. Okay. But I also think we need to go ahead and just pencil this in for next year, Courtney, so that you can experience this at one point.
Yeah.
But it's really cool. It's a fundraiser for our local children's hospital and like different like local groups, like, you know, the elementary schools and like Boy Scout troops and people like that will like all do like a themed tree. So they like have one tree that's like all the Grinch stuff, or
it's also called Fantasy of Trees. I think we skipped that part in the.
Oh, did I not say that?
Maybe you did. We'll find out when I'm editing. Okay. I thought we accidentally skipped to me never have being there, but I don't know.
I mean, it is possible. I do tend to trail off in the middle of a sentence, so anyway. I would not be surprised. But yes, it is called Fantasy of Trees. Yeah. And so they just like decorate Christmas trees in like these different themes, and then people like bid on them. So like if you win the tree, like you get to take it home, and then all the money goes to the children's hospital. So but it's really cool. And they have like little like crafts that like the kids can do or whatever. But it's just like a ton of really cool Christmas trees, and like they all have like different themes.
It sounds like something I would love. It sounds like that's literally right up my alley.
This is why I was so shocked that you've never been, Courtney. This is why both of us were so surprised.
I don't know why I haven't. Like, my niece and nephew have gone. Like, they went last year. And
Courtney,
this
next year, we are going.
Okay.
Put it on your calendar.
Invite me next time. I didn't get invited.
I invited you. You were going shopping.
That's true. Don't do it on Friday. Do it Saturday.
I invited sober Courtney and she forgot.
Yeah.
Okay. Next year, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, we are going to Fantasy of the Trees together.
See, after Jacqueline invited me to do a half marathon, I just kind of don't listen to her invitations anymore. I just a no to everything after that.
Like, nope, I'm like, oh, wait. You're like, oh, sometimes I do want to do things with you. Just
okay. I gotta realize I overcorrected. You know, I really overcorrected with the yes to the half marathon, and now I'm really overcorrecting with the no's. Now I gotta meet in the middle.
Not gonna do a single thing I suggest for the next year, but that's fine. The next year, you don't have to go to anything I invite you to, except Fantasy of Trees next year.
I'll pencil it in. The second I get my new planner, writing it down.
Perfect. Okay. Anyway, so that was my perk of the week. So I used to go every year with my mom because like she loved Christmas stuff. So like we would always go. And so this year I got to take Millie for the first time, and she loved it. I mean, just like in complete awe. There was a Nightmare Before Christmas tree, which was her absolute favorite. She has not stopped talking about it. There was one ornament where Jack Skellington's like in a boat or something. I don't know. She brings that up all day, every day about Jack Skellington in the boat.
Did you bid on that tree?
No, I did not. But thankfully, she doesn't understand how it works yet. When she gets a little older, she's going to be like, she's
going to be writing it down everywhere.
Yes. But it was so cool. And then they have like I said, you can like pay to like do like little crafts or whatever. And it's like, $2 to $3 each. Like it's pretty affordable. But they have like a little like ornament you could decorate. So she's like going to town with her Sharpies. So now we have this beautiful ornament on the tree that just has her Sharpie scribbles all over it. It's super cute. And then they also had these little like mini trees that you could decorate. So they had like little like beaded like necklace things that they just like tore, in like little sections. So they had like those and a little like star like wire thing or whatever. And there's like there's 3 different textures, 4 different colors. This child put 18 of the same one on this tree.
She knows what she likes. She likes what she knows.
And then and then we went back and did it again because it ended up, you have to like buy the tickets to do the crafts. This episode's going on so long. I'm almost finished, I promise. So you had to buy the tickets to do the crafts, and I ended up with like only 2 tickets, and that's the only activity that was just 2 tickets. And I was like, I don't want to go buy another one. We'll just make another damn tree. And she did it again with the same one. So I grabbed like a few others and stuck it on there so it has a little color. But the one she has in her room with her 10,000 silver beads on it, it's adorable. And she carries it with her everywhere.
Everywhere.
Their comfort tree.
That's so funny.
Okay, we're going to end this episode now. You guys know where to find us on all the places. We are on patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes if you guys want. Coming up on now 40 bonus episodes,
With
all
a
kinds of other fun
really
stuff.
exciting bonus coming up.
This one's going to be really good. You guys don't want to miss this one.
Yeah, we'll announce it next week, what we're doing.
Yep.
And if you want to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, anywhere you can give us 5 stars, or if you want to like and subscribe on YouTube, only nice comments. Bad comments means I cry in my bathroom alone, and that's not fun. But yeah, that's about all I got. You guys know the drill. It's too late. It's going on too long. I hope you guys learn something new with this episode.
Yes.
Let's have a great discussion about it, talk about it. No hate comments on it. We'll block you.
Yep.
But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.